Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Leila Baga. I'm head of data science at Facebook. As you know, this webinar series is supported by MENA Center at the University of California, Berkeley. During our previous webinar, Dr. Amir Sepehri, who is the applied research scientist at META, presented about how utilizing data has been evolving in the past few decades. This presentation and all the previous presentation can be found on the Facebook YouTube channel for those who missed them or those who want to rewatch them. Just a little bit housekeeping before we get started. Please type your question at the Zoom chat box. I will bring them up during the presentation, and also we will have time for questions at the end. Today's talk, it's about opportunities to transform healthcare with AI. Will be presented by Dr. Mohsen Hejrati. He is a computer scientist focused on biotechnology and healthcare to help people live healthier longer. Currently, he is a director of AI and cloud engineering at Gentech and co-founder of the Galliot. In the past, Dr. Hejrati coded for the self-driving cars at Google, founded Maktab Khune, which is the largest Farsi MOOC, served by 80 million students so far and 7 million active students each year, and launched several other startups. He received a PhD in machine learning and computer vision from the University of California. Dr. Hejrati, we can't wait for your presentation.
Thank you. Good evening and good morning. Thanks for the time. So thanks so much also for introducing me. So yeah, a little bit of background. My training is in math and computer science, and then I worked in tech for a while, and then I switched to biotech, and I'm right now at Genentech, which is kind of the best biotech company in the world. So I kind of divided the opportunities to transform healthcare into several big categories, because healthcare is just a massive field, and there's a lot of ways you can leverage AI, but I just wanted to give you some sense about like the general directions that I see. So the first one is providing better healthcare, and by better I mean better quality. So you generally get better treatment for your diseases and get well sooner. A few examples that falls into this category are personalized medicine. The idea behind personalized medicine is that it can use data and AI and analytics to find treatments that are very specific to each patient's unique biology and the disease and conditions. And this could mean the drug is created specifically for that patient and disease, or the dosing of the drug, or the combination of that drug with other drugs. But to really do that well, you need to have a lot of data and a lot of analytics tool to be able to do that. And I'll talk about it a little bit more. Another way to improve healthcare with AI is to improve the diagnosis with better diagnosis tools, leveraging AI or augmenting physicians and healthcare system with AI tools. So, as an example, 80,000 patients die each year. I think this number is just for US. 80,000 patients die just because of an error in diagnosis. That means either they get the wrong diagnosis and they lose time, or they get diagnosis but the diagnosis is not specific enough for the disease. So how can AI help address this problem? There are several ways. So first of all, AI can be a little more accurate. So when you take two doctors and ask them to provide a diagnosis for things like COVID, uh, it's a surprisingly high number of cases where doctors don't agree with each other. So the diagnosis field, it seems like simple. You have a disease, and doctors should be able to diagnose it, or should be able to agree to a diagnostic, but that's not the case. So in pretty much a lot of diseases, you will see a huge disagreement between doctors, and that's due to a lot of factors. Diseases are very complex. The information that physicians take into account to make a diagnosis can be varying. And the training of those doctors can change, and they can also be trained on different populations, so they have different biases. So all of this leads to a huge variance in the diagnosis that a single patient can get. But AI can make that a little better because AI can help doctors be more consistent in their diagnosis and be more accurate. And it can save lives. And by the way, I'm happy to answer questions in the middle of the presentation. An example of this, you have lots of news and papers coming out every week now of a new algorithm that can accurately predict diagnosis for different diseases. An example of this is in lung cancer, where systems could do the diagnosis earlier than doctors and more accurate. So the next area where you can improve the healthcare system with AI or make it better care, sorry, is in drug discovery. So the future of healthcare, as a lot of you have already seen or read about, is in personalized medicine. So the idea that your treatment and your approach to getting treatment is created for your individual case. No, we put labels like cancer or dementia or a lot of other diseases as if it's just a single disease, but it's really usually a combination of different factors that for simplicity is put under a single label. But underlying condition that causes these diseases can be very complex. So the solution, the treatment can also be very different per patient. So the the promise of personalized medicine is to use all the data and compute that's available to create these personalized treatments. And a big part of that is to bring a lot more drugs, novel drugs that can be used in the personalized medicine setting. So today, an area that's more advanced in terms of personalized medicine is cancer. So we know a lot about these days the role of immune system in treating cancer, and a lot of cases where understanding the specific uh, aspects of your immune system can help uh, providing a very powerful treatment, and a lot of times curing the cancer completely for patients. And that required like developing drugs that are specifically designed for patients. For instance, there are cell therapies these days that can cure your cancer completely, or the world is working on RNA vaccines to use them for creating the vaccine that's just created for an individual patient that can adjust their immune system to fight the cancer. And how can AI help here? So AI can help with drug discovery by lowering the cost, meaning that previously it would have been very difficult to do experiments in and developing and discovering new drugs, because you had to run a lot of experiments in the physical world. But today we don't have to do the same amount of experiments in physical world, because we can leverage data and AI to simulate a lot of that in the virtual world or in silico. That allows us to instead of just going with lower quality candidates to test in the lab, we can screen a lot of them and just test the better candidates. And that reduces our cost to discover new drugs, and that can help us discover them faster and discover them for very specific needs. It also can help us develop safer drugs. So as you know, drugs usually have side effects, and it is because we develop the drugs to do a specific thing, but they can also do something else to another part of body that's not desired, but we have to deal with it. But with AI and data, you can simulate how a drug interact with all tissues in your body, so you can get better and safer drugs without the side effects. So I'll go to the next one. So as an example of how AI is helping in the drug discovery domain, you may have seen this news about AlphaFold, which is Google's latest algorithm to predict protein structures. This is significant because proteins are the fundamental blocks of your cells, and understanding their structure and understanding their function is a very critical step in developing drugs that can either interact with your body's proteins and your cells proteins, or also just developing proteins as a drug that can go into your body and help deal with specific diseases. So this is not a theory today. This is something that people are using to develop better drugs. So I talked about a few opportunities to provide better healthcare with AI. Now I want to talk about another direction that we can use AI to improve healthcare. It's about making healthcare more accessible. So there are very different ways that this can happen, but a big issue today is that healthcare is very expensive, and it's not accessible to everyone in the world in a fair and uniform manner. So how can AI help here? It can help by providing access to the state-of-the-art healthcare to more patients around the world by augmenting physicians. Um, so we know that the burden on physicians is increasing. We don't have enough physicians, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough hospitals in the world to provide the high quality care for everyone. As an example of that, since from 2007 to 2017, in 10 years, the workload for pathologists in US increased 42%. That's a huge amount of increase in workload for pathologists. And 1/3 of them are reported to be burnt out. And you can imagine that this is such a critical issue because when you get cancer or some other diseases, uh, you need to do a biopsy and send it to pathologists to be able to get a proper diagnosis, to be able to get a proper care. And if you don't have enough of those, you won't be able to get the right care for your disease. And AI can help here by augmenting pathologists, by helping them reducing their workload. It's like the co-pilot or the cruise control on your car that can take a huge amount of load from you, make it safer, make it easier for you to drive, but it's not replacing you, right? So in a lot of cases, these algorithms can be used to do the hard and uh, the repetitive work or the like non-critical work for pathologists. It can find regions that are suspicion. Um, it can kind of count cells. It can identify cells in a pathology slide, and it can generally help physicians to do their job better. And there's a lot of progress in this domain already, and FDA is very active in approving AI tools for diagnosis and pathology. Another example in providing better care or making care more accessible. Since the start of COVID, a lot of patients did not feel safe to go to hospitals and doctor offices. And also a lot of hospital systems were overloaded with COVID patients. So it's a huge increase, 40 times increase in telehealth usage since the start of COVID. So in just 2 years, all the systems in the healthcare started offering telehealth. So this telehealth is a great tool, but we know there is a lot of limitation, and AI can again come in here and help provide assistance to the doctors and patients in their telehealth uh, journeys. As another example of this, Today, you can get a surgery remotely, and these are very complex, operations usually, and to assist the doctors make these surgeries more successful. Robotics tools are used that leverage a lot of AI to make the surgery safe and practical. So we talked about how to improve the quality of healthcare, get better healthcare, and how to make it more accessible using AI. Now I want to talk about the third concept here, which is reducing the costs. So we hear about this all the time, that healthcare is the largest single category of spending in governments around the world. It's a huge political issue everywhere in the world, and reducing cost is a objective. Uh, I'm not like an economist or politician, but I think reducing healthcare costs could also mean making the healthcare more accessible to more people. So that's very interesting for me. How can AI help here? So we talked a little bit about how AI can help bring down the cost of developing drugs. I'll talk a little more about this here. It also can help with making diagnosis possible at earlier stages of disease, and that means you will get diagnosed earlier in your disease, so that the burden of the disease on you and the healthcare system is going to be lower. So we'll talk about this in a bit. So the average cost of developing a drug in the US currently is more than $1 billion, right? This cost is translated into the cost of the drugs that we take every day, because the pharma companies have to fund their R&D by selling their current drugs. So if we can bring the cost of developing new drugs down, we can bring the cost of our existing drugs down too. Or with the same cost, we can get better drugs or more drugs. So, and out of this $1.3 billion to develop new drugs, majority of it, maybe 80% of it is, excuse me, maybe 80% of this is spent on running clinical trials. And the reason that majority of it is spent on clinical trials is that a clinical trial is a very complex operation that has to recruit patients in healthcare systems across the globe, and have to get their data, administer drugs, and it's just a very, very complex logistical challenge, and a lot of times it fails. So you run many trials, and out of those, 10 to 15% of them succeed. So so it's very expensive. So how can AI help reduce the cost? It can reduce the cost by reducing the duration that you run your clinical trial. So usually a clinical trial, the general idea of a clinical trial is that you have a drug candidate. You want to know if it is effective and safe to give to patients for a specific disease. And the way you do it is that you say, I'll create a patient population, let's say 100 patients. I'll give my drug to 50 of them, and I'll give placebo to 50 other, and I'll observe them over 5 years and see how they benefit from my drug. Now, if you don't observe your patients for 5 years, it might be difficult to see the signal that your drug is effective. But if you observe them for 5 years, it might be very expensive. So there is always a trade-off that what is the shortest period of time that you can observe your patients in a clinical trial that gives you the answer whether the drug is safe and effective. And this reduction has a very linear correlation in reduction of the cost of clinical development. Meaning if you can reduce 20% on average on all of your clinical trials, you probably are reducing 20% of this $1.3 billion because that's the majority of the money spent. So how can AI help here? Uh, you can use data and algorithms and AI um, to kind of simulate patients and try to and use the patient simulation that you created to kind of augment your real world observation and enhance the signal you get from your clinical trial. So it's kind of like you get a noisy image and you use AI to denoise your image. The same concepts, like you get a noisy signal from running a shorter clinical trial, but you can use AI and algorithms to make that signal sharper. The same story with reducing number of enrolled patients. So you need to usually you enroll hundreds or thousands of patients because you want to make sure you see a reliable signal about the efficacy and safety of your drug. And again, if you can have these algorithms that can reduce the noise in your signal, you can augment them and you can enroll less number of patients. And again, the cost of the clinical trial is usually the how many patients you recruit or over how much time. So if you can reduce each of these by 20%, that means you're reducing the total cost of your clinical trial by 30-40% and saving a massive amount of money. And then you can also use AI to increase diversity. So a lot of drugs today are developed on very biased patient populations, usually white males. And with AI, you can, and there's a reason for that. Usually the sites would help you test your drug there in certain locations. But with AI and data, you can open up your search. You can make it easier for a broader set of hospitals and sites to participate in your clinical trials. And you can also systematically decide that you need to have a more inclusive patient population so you can measure how diverse is your population and so on and so forth. Another area where you can reduce the cost is by automation. So you already know a lot of exciting development in the field of natural language processing. So the healthcare system is filled with unstructured documents going around, either in the form of faxes or emails or documents and PDFs and scans and so on and so forth, like a doctor report or radiologist report. And bringing data out of this unstructured documents is a very early field and can save millions and billions of dollars by bringing automation to the healthcare system. There's a lot of automation currently in the healthcare system, saving hundreds of billions of dollars, but there is an opportunity to do a lot more. This can improve access. For instance, uh, you can have chatbots and you can have automated systems that can talk to patients and bring access to more patients around the world. You can lower the cost by replacing manual labor with natural language agents that can automatically extract information from documents. And as an insurance, you can reduce fraud by automatically identifying false claims and so on and so forth. So this was the last pillar. So I talked about three areas: how to get better healthcare, how to provide more access, and how to reduce costs. So I'll stop here and I can answer questions.
I appreciate the great presentation. Let's have a time for a question.
I have a, a kind of a high-level question. It's quite broad, but what would you say is kind of the single biggest bottleneck to realizing a lot of these benefits? I imagine it may not be technical, but just curious.
I don't know. I mean, I am an expert in one small area here, so I don't know what is the biggest bottleneck. But in my area, there are two maybe. One is in data and how data is available and integrated and the quality of data. And the other one is around regulation and how regulation is catching up with the interesting work that's happening in the field.
Thank you. Actually, I have a question about the part that you said. By personalized medicine, we are currently able to simulate the body of the human. After that, we predict how a new drug can be affect the patient. I would like to know if you know any example or any project that worked in this domain.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. For instance, there's a lot of work around creating personalized cancer treatment. So trying to look at your tumor and then predict what type of what type of how can you adjust the immune system to be able to attack this cancer tumor. So you know, the COVID vaccine is using what is called like the RNA vaccine, right? The new types of vaccine. And the way they work is that this RNAs go to your body and your immune system starts to recognize them. So, and by recognizing these, these RNAs will produce proteins, and then your immune system start recognizing them. So they can learn to detect COVID, for instance. The same can be applied for cancer, but then you have to engineer it. So you have to be able to predict what kind of RNA or proteins do you have to show to your immune system so that it can attack the cancer more effectively. So kind of predicting your biology. Another one is generally what we use is as a simulation or trying to predict how diseases progress in pretty much any disease that happens. But an area of interest for us is diseases where it's very chronic, so it progresses very slowly, and that makes it very hard to develop drugs for these types of diseases. For instance, Alzheimer or dementia. It's hard to develop drugs for these diseases because to really see the effect of your drug, you have to maybe wait for 5 or 10 years. And if you can't predict or if you can simulate the patients, then you don't have to wait 10 years. You can maybe say, oh, I know how this patient will change, and I'll see the effect of my drug sooner. But yeah, that was, I guess, 2 examples.
It was great, thank you. And also another question came to my mind. Actually, do we are able currently, or how, or distance from this situation, that be able to design a drug with the AI model and try to produce this drug without any lab trial, which it's really cost effective, and it needs a lot of money to try a new drug in the lab. Do we are far from this this stage to design a drug with AI instead of the lab trial?
I mean, today, pretty much all the new drugs have some form of AI somewhere in the design process. I don't think anything will be used, like no drug will be designed purely using algorithms. It has to be tested in the lab, but what the AI does is it kind of assist in the design process. So let's see, like let's imagine you have a molecule, a small molecule drug. You want it to have certain desired properties, like it has to be stable, it has to be soluble, it has to bind to certain protein as a target. So instead of like going from scratch, you can you use AI to kind of give you a good set of candidates. Then you can test those candidates in the lab, and then based on the results, you can feed the result back into your AI algorithm so that it can give you a new set of better candidates, and so on and so forth. So this iterative process includes AI, and that's already happening in the more advanced biotech companies. On the protein side, the same story. Like people use AI to predict properties of proteins, so that they don't have to test everything in the lab. So the concept is not to replace the lab. The concept is to use the lab more efficiently and get more out of it.
Great, totally makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions? I believe Dr. Yahya,
Yes.
yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hejrati. My question is about what do you, as I have understood, most pharmaceuticals are focused on very basic disease that they are working on the research and development to find. Maybe I don't know how many diseases are that they have a good market and they have a vast market. But what do you think that about the rare disease, such as chronic fatigues and things that are not so much in popular in research and development, and know about the rare disease? No, nothing happened about any treatment that we can have, any medicine that we can have. What do you think that the approach of AI in healthcare may democratize and may can bring up more opportunity for considering also these rare disease, because they, yeah, you know what I mean? What do you think? Do you see any opportunity for looking at their rare disease also by the labs or by the specialists using this AI and data science approach? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so the problem with rare disease is that you have to spend a lot of money, and because it's rare, you probably can't make the money you spend on R&D, right? And also, it's not just a drug, it's also usually the diagnosis of the rare disease is also pretty hard, right? So AI can do two things. First of all, it can help with diagnosing those patients with this rare disease better, right? So you you get less of misdiagnosis or missing those patients. An example of this is that even with non-rare diseases, a lot of pharmas have drugs right now in the market that patients could benefit from, but because they don't ever get that diagnosis, they don't get treatment. So AI can go through your EHR records and automatically suggest that maybe you should check this patient for this specific disease or the rare disease. So that's one way to make to help this situation. The other way is that again, when you bring the cost of the discovering and developing drugs down, then more and more diseases will become economically attractive to develop drugs for. And also, sometimes the rare diseases are just a set of a complicated set of symptoms and syndromes. So you kind of can use AI to kind of analyze and find maybe a combination of existing therapies that can address that. But yeah, I think in general, with AI, you have to spend less to develop drugs for generally any disease. So for rare diseases, it means it will become more attractive, so more people can try finding solutions. Yeah. But yeah, that's a very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Dr. Leila, can I ask another question?
Please.
Okay, so Mohsen John, I was thinking that maybe it is time for more and this over this internet and network and this kind of the international in the post-COVID, we are more I would say we are more global, we are more connected, and for complex problems in the, I would say, applying AI to the finding a treatment, a new medicine, whatever you say, you talked about more collaboration are needed worldwide, and maybe a crowd wisdom is needed. Maybe it is time to find out in gathering data around the world and also collaboration. It is now I think it's time over that in one lab an important thing may happen. Much more collaboration are needed, and I don't know how do you see this in post-COVID, that there will be opportunity for more global collaborations in gathering data, or I would say a lot of tests that are needed, and yeah, so these are the things can bring out more momentum to this kind of just being in a lab and few scientists working on a problem.
Yeah,
What do you think about?
I agree. I think the data is a big issue, right? If we can collaborate globally and to create data sets that can help move the field forward so much. So I think that's a very valid comment and valuable comments, that more global collaboration can definitely help this field and the adoption of AI. It's all about data, right? These AI algorithms, they're dependent on data. The more data you have, the higher quality, the better outcome you will have.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other question? Dr. Islay, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have a short question. I would like to know your general opinion about the application of digital twins in the healthcare. I mean, its current state, its trend, and its future, and more particularly from the business point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a good question. My expertise again is in drug development, and especially early stage drug development. But the concept of digital twin can be used there. For instance, you can, for instance, a lot of cancer treatments these days that are developed in pharma can be quite effective. They can treat patients. So it's even unethical that when you're running a clinical trial, you give some patients who desperately need a drug a placebo. So digital twins can help with replacing the control arm or reducing the size of your control arm. It's also cheaper, right? So you can reduce the size of your control arm, so you have less patients. Where it is exactly and how practical is it to use digital twins? I think it's still early days. It's especially the idea that we can simulate or we can create a full digital twin of patients for research purposes. It's still not very mature. So I would not say it's ready for use. In other scenarios, maybe if you're trying to, I don't know, use it for designing healthcare policies or measuring the outcome of your healthcare spending, and do what if scenarios in your business, like you're in insurance and you want to know what would happen if I create this new policy. And I think that digital twins with the quality that we have today might be sufficient. So the concept is essentially you want to be able to do counterfactual analysis, right? And in the business scenarios, sometimes you want to do that to simulate new business policies without having to, or you want to kind of get a sense about the effect of that. So in those scenarios, maybe it works, but in R&D environment for pharmaceuticals, it's still early.
Any other question? Hind, please.
Yes, hi. I wanted to ask for an advice for anyone who's right now in the research and development phase. I know there's two main challenges, which are the data, as patient data are sensitive, and the regulations. So, like maybe in the drug industry, I know maybe pharmacists, the medicines cannot be prescribed without a pharmacist being involved there. So how to overcome the regulations, how much trust the healthcare puts on the AI sector so they can maybe change regulations?
I mean, the regulation here is not necessarily bad. It's just a little slow. The regulation here is to keep patients safe, right? So I think the regulatory agencies usually may not know how to evaluate an AI algorithm, right? So a lot of work is going on in FDA, for instance, on developing new guidelines for how to submit an AI medical device. So I think there's just a lot of activities in the field. It's not necessarily bad in my view. It's just the nature of it. And also it's very specific. For instance, in diagnostic, there's just a lot more activity. For instance, you have a lot more algorithm in diagnostic space than in the pharmaceutical space that are AI based. So how to overcome this? I think it's a collaboration. It's just you need to work with them very closely to build that understanding of these methods, how to evaluate them. It's all about showing that this thing is safe and effective. So we do that already. With lab based experiments. So I don't think it's a fundamental issue that they have against AI. I mean, it also depends. Like I know FDA doesn't have a fundamental issue against AI as long as you can prove it's safe and effective. And it's not easy to prove it's safe and effective. It's you need data, and you need to have some rigorous ways to do experiments. So we know a lot of folks. It's because it's a very hot industry. Everyone is now an AI scientist too. So that also doesn't help.
Thank you. Any other question? I believe we have covered all the questions. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before I wrap up, Dr. Hejrati?
No, that was it. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you so much from you. It was a great presentation, and we learned a lot. And also, thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Please join our next webinar of MENA AI and data science. And again, have a good time. Bye.
Bye.